So are all the answers then for you on the right, or do you have frustrations with the right? Because I think right before we started, we only talked for about 30 seconds, but I think you said something to the effect of I'm still a liberal.
I've tried to, no, I mean, you know, what did I took on the leaders of the religious right over Mark Raskow, was the governor of Montana and was the chairman of the RNC, met with I think it's called the Human Rights Association, which is a gay group. And he addressed them or whatever, met with them. And he was denounced by Paul Weyrich and very well-known leaders of the religious right. And I wrote an article saying that a political party is not a religious movement, or shouldn't be. And it's the job of the RNC chair to reach out.
Yeah.
and so forth. And I've never been an opponent of gay marriage, and I could go on and on.
Yeah, and you mentioned before that abortion, although you're not a fan, to say the least, but you are pro-choice, right? So
no, I wouldn't describe myself as pro-choice.
Okay.
And it's been a long lifetime of rethinking this issue. When I grew up, abortions were illegal after the third month. And we know a lot more now, and medical techniques, well, we just know a lot more about fetuses. You know, if you think about it, they're children from conception. I mean, it's not an argument. There's a person already.
You think from the moment of conception?
Yeah, and the woman, it's not about the woman's body alone. You know, I think the fathers are involved as well, but certainly there's a child there. So, you know, the argument against it is you want to bring a kid into the world that's going to have an absolutely miserable life because it's a wrong parent at the wrong time. You know, and I think the energy should be spent on finding ways to take care of children that their parents aren't able to take care of. It's a very vexed problem.
Yeah.
And I've confronted right-wingers, actually it was in the Heritage Foundation debate, you know, who said it's murder. I said, well, if you think it's murder, then you should be demanding the execution of every mother in America who's had an abortion. And if you don't, it's a much more complicated problem. So that's kind of where I am.
What was his response to that?
And shut him up.
That gets him real quiet. Well, that's why the abortion one to me is one where I think very good people on both sides of this are just struggling with it because it almost is coming down to the basic questions of life. And
it is, but you can't discuss basic questions in our political atmosphere, not with the left. I mean, the left wants to convert everything into a morality play where they're right.
How much of this is culture? Did you see that change too, that it's just, I know what you're saying, that culture is the most important thing, but when did it go from, like, I was thinking even this morning about...
The left started taking over the universities in the 70s, and now they've got the K-12 schools as well. And, you know, I conducted it was literally a 5 or 6 year campaign to try to get an academic Bill of Rights, really a student Bill of Rights, that students have a right to a professional education, and in a democracy that means that professors can express their opinions, but they have to present the opposing sides of controversial issues in a fair-minded way. And I was attacked from one end of the country to the other as a Torquemada and a thought controller. It was very liberal, and I did it all out of their own documents.
Yeah.
There's a very famous academic freedom statement that was drawn up.
What's the thought control part of trying to get more thought in there?
You can't be logical with a leftist. This is the AAUP. These are Stalinists. I mean, I debated them across the country. They put me through the ringer. But, you know, like I say, you get to a point where you're libel-proof because they've libeled you so much that it doesn't have. But they fought it tooth and nail. And, for example, I had praised in all of my speeches, it's a 1915 statement on academic freedom by the American Association of University Professors. And the Penn State still has as its had as its academic freedom provision the statement that it is not the place of a professor in a democratic society to indoctrinate his or her students. Therefore, they must present divergent opinions in a fair-minded manner. That's a paraphrase of it. And I praise that. And so the head of the AAUP, Carrie Nelson, made it a personal crusade to get that ripped out of the Penn State academic freedom provision.
The so-called liberal person, right?
Yeah,
wanted now this to be removed.
He's a leftist, Carrie.
Yeah.
He actually, I mean, he's defended me in some places, so he's like an whatever. He's not quite a doctrinaire. But he did. The faculty senate there ripped it out and took out explicitly the thing, it's not the place to indoctrinate the students.
Yeah. Do you find when you meet people, maybe some young people that are waking up to some of this stuff, that once they see one piece of it, that the rest of it crumbles very quickly? Because I see this, because I saw it happen with myself, obviously, and for me, it's still an unfolding process, I think, and that's why I'm happy to have these conversations. But I see it happening with other people now. I get emails every day. People will be like, one little thing happened, and then literally 2 months later, I now believe everything the reverse.
Steve Miller says it was guns. That's what turned him from a liberal into a conservative. I have somebody who writes occasionally from Front Page, my website, who heard me speak in Camden, New Jersey, and I pointed out, as I do in my book, Big Agenda, every inner city of any size is 100% controlled by the Democratic Party and progressives. It has been for 50 to 100 years, including Camden. So everything—
Milwaukee, Atlanta, Chicago, all these places,
all the killing fields,
Yeah.
St. Louis, Baltimore, right? Everything that's wrong in the inner cities that policy can affect, Democrats and progressives are responsible for. Once you see that, it's all over.
And then there are people out there screaming that it's
Then
Trump's
you start
fault that
reading.
he wasn't even president.
We had this. Here's a leftist mentality. When Peter Collier and I wrote this bestseller on the Kennedys, we found ourselves in a green room of Good Morning America, sitting. And there were only 3 people. The other person was William F. Buckley. And was dead silence in the room. And the reason that Peter and I were silent is we had no idea who Buckley was. We just knew. We didn't want to be nice to a fascist. That's what the left called him, a fascist. So we didn't want to be nice to a fascist. So Peter broke the ice by saying, my mother is a big fan of yours. And then we found out from Buckley, who's a very gracious human being, that he was silent because his son had just written a very critical attack on a Kennedy book. There was another one that came out, and he didn't know if it was ours. But the lack of civility of the left, it's fascist. That's what it is. And there's no way, I mean, the only response you can have is one like Milo's, and just go in their face. Otherwise, they just shout you down.
Yeah. There is an incredible video that I saw a couple of years ago of you at University of San Diego, I think, and a young Muslim student gets up.
Very articulate with a headscarf.
Yeah, and at first she opens by thanking you for coming and saying she's
That was sarcastic.
Diversity of thought. And people can watch it. We'll link to it below so people can actually watch the video. There's a twang of sarcasm in it, or it was either sarcasm or she was trying to butter you up before she went in for the kill. Can you explain the rest of what happened there so that I don't
then
edit it in any
she
way? Because it's an incredible
said I
moment.
falsely accused the Muslim Students Association of being a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, which it is, and Hamas. So, and we had distributed a pamphlet showing this. So I, instead of arguing about whether the Muslim Students Association and Students for Justice for Palestine, they're both Hamas fronts, Brotherhood fronts. Instead of arguing with her, I just decided to cut to the chase. I said, will you condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization? And she said, you want to crucify me? I said, come again. I don't know how I responded, come again. And she said, well, if I don't condemn Hamas, then I will be arrested by the Department of Homeland Security. This is how delusional these people are. So I changed the question. I had done this at other campuses, so I knew what sort of to expect. I said, let me put it to you this way. I'm a Jew. And the head of Hezbollah says he wants us Jews to gather in Israel so he won't have to hunt us down globally. For it or against it? She leaned into the microphone and said, for it. And she was defended afterwards by the Muslim Students Association, the whole left. They're genocidal. They want to kill the Jews.
When she said that, I suspect you were not shocked, as insanely shocking as that sounds.
No, because I had it at UC Santa Barbara. I asked the same question of the head of the Muslim Students Association. And he said it was too complicated a question for a yes-no answer.
Right, genocide's too complicated.
He was smarter than she was.
Right, hers was just like...
Hers was just showing you what they think and what they want.
So, all right, so let's shift to Islam then. I've been talking about it, and I've tried to I've brought on liberals to talk about it. I've had, very measured people like Sam Harris quote Pew polls. I've had Ayaan Hirsi Ali on, who talks about her own personal experience.
These are all enemies of the left.
People who are Majid Nawaz, who's a Muslim
Although
reformer.
Harris is, he's still a leftist, liberal.
Yeah, he's a liberal. He's a liberal. Whether that I don't want to speak for him. I don't want to get him into any extra trouble.
Well,
but my point is that I've had plenty of people thought of as liberals or on the left discuss it. They get hate from the left. Then I've had people more on the right talk about it, such as Lauren Southern and Ben Shapiro and some others, and of course they're going to get a certain amount of hate for it. How do you gauge how much of a problem this actually is at the moment?
The problem being?
The problem being Islamic extremism. Or violent
I
jihad,
think
or whatever you want to call it.
I think Islam is a problem. No rational person could not look at Islam and say it's not a problematic religion. It preaches hatred against all other religions. It sanctions. There's just a series of quotes from the Quran. Sanctions murder, beheading of infidels, which is what we are. The Prophet Muhammad has said that the day of judgment will only come when the Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, when the Jews hide behind the rocks and the trees, and the rocks and the trees cry out, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him."
Yeah.
Not only is this not repudiated by organized Islam, but it's repeated. Yusuf al-Qaradawi said as much. The Holocaust was a punishment on Egyptian TV, and he is the imam, the leading imam, not only for the Muslim Brotherhood, but for Huma Abedin, Hillary's right hand. That's her imam. That the Holocaust was God's punishment of the Jews for their corruption, and it will come again, this time, Allah willing, at the hands of the believers. He's a genocidal Nazi, is Qaradawi, and he's the imam of Hillary Clinton's right hand and deputy in charge of Muslim affairs for the State Department. Yeah, it's a big problem, not a little one.
Yeah. So
and Keith Ellison is the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, is now the #2 guy in the Democratic Party. He only missed by 13 votes.
Yeah.
How could the Democratic Party embrace this? And Tom Perez is no better. But at least Ellison has an open record, of being in bed with the Muslim Brotherhood, being supported by them, and being a Farrakhan Jew hater, and America hater, and white hater. Come on. What happened to the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, and the Farrakhan stuff is amazing because even in the last couple of days, I don't follow Farrakhan on Twitter, who is verified. Milo's not on Twitter anymore. But I was looking at Farrakhan's Twitter feed, or something got retweeted into my feed. I mean, it's all God will destroy America, hate all the Jews, hate white people.
And he was for 11 years a spokesman for the Nation of Islam. And people, they have to repudiate what they did. This is why I say Barack Obama is a communist. He was raised by communists. His whole political career until he became a United States Senator was in the communist left. I know these people. If you are part of a movement that you know is evil, the first thing you want to do is warn other people about it, especially when it's so deceptive. It talks about social justice and all this crap. Anyway.
No, well, I mean, that.
But he hasn't, so that's how you know what his allegiances are. And when you asked me about the, this was earlier in our conversation about why is the Democratic Party so soft on Islamic terrorists? They're people of color. That has to play a big role. The first thing you do is, we have to understand if they're killing people, it must be because we did something. Very sick.
Yeah. What is that self-flagellation that so many people in the West have?
It's guilt. I mean,
It's
Shelby
guilt of-
Steele
it's
has written
guilt of success.
Shelby Steele has written a whole book called White Guilt. Yeah, it'll bring down our great civilization if it's the, And we haven't talked about Donald Trump, which is the subject of my book.
Yeah. Okay. So let's. All right.
I think if we have an antidote, he's it.
So you really believe that Trump and that, I was going to say a second ago when you were talking about, fighting the roots of Islamic extremism. I mean, Bannon, from what I understand, seems to be the architect of that.
He's a good guy, Steve Bannon.
Yeah. So you don't believe him to be an anti-Semite?
Hell no. First of all, the chief evidence, there's two evidence given that Steve Bannon is an anti-Semite. One is a disgruntled wife in the middle of a divorce proceeding, a custody case, who claimed that he said that Jewish children are whiny, which may well be the case if the whole ritual of bar mitzvahs, you shower a 13-year-old with tons of money and give him an audience of adults. Okay, so they might be.
It's a lot to deal with.
They might be whiny.
Right.
Who knows?
Right.
But that's certainly not Jew hating.
Right. Regardless, even if he did say it, that's not. You'd have to.
Big deal. He's fighting with that wife that over the kids and when they go to school, and maybe the school was very expensive. It is an expensive school.
Yeah.
The Archer School. The other evidence is an article that I wrote.
Yeah.
I gave the title to Bill Kristol, Republican spoiler, renegade Jew.
Uh-huh.
So people who haven't read the article.
I read the article. I did not find anything anti-Semitic.
No, he was renegade because he's going to return Huma Abedin and Ben Rhodes, who was the architect, one of the architects of the Iran deal, back to power. It's a death knell for Israel. I mean, what they've done. Not to mention the it's not. Iran isn't powerful enough to destroy the United States, but its leaders do lead chants of death to America. That's what they believe. Why? If Franklin Roosevelt gave nuclear weapons to Hitler, what would we call him? Obama is an American traitor, and that's because he's a communist and always has been and always will be.
So I know enough people are going to watch that and go, wait a minute, but the deal says that they can't get nukes. But you would say, well, it expires. It expires.
One, it expires. Two, the effect of the deal was to lift the sanctions, bring Iran back into the community of nations. He gave them $200 billion, $200 billion, I forget all the payments, and there's no controls. But even if there were controls, why would you bring them out of isolation? Now Iran is running over the Middle East. They overthrew the government in Yemen, which is why we now are losing American lives there. Come on. Anyway, so that's why I thought that Kristol, and I didn't attack Kristol during the campaign. Look, I can see Donald Trump. I can see why he upsets some people.
Yeah.
I can see how, in my view, they're exaggerated, the fears that, I don't think for a second that he's anti-Mexican or bigoted in any way. And I'm one of those people who says, well, look, he's been in public life for 30 years. He didn't become a racist until he was running against a Democrat, for crying out tears. I could see how people would get bent out of shape during the campaign. But once he's the nominee, then it's him or Hillary. And if it's Hillary, it's Huma Abedin. It's, the whole anti-Israel crew.
So you can sympathize then with Bill Kristol's intent. So Bill Kristol, who wanted conservatism, old, what's thought of as real, real conservatism to live forever.
These are religion. These are people treating politics as a religion.
Yeah.
If you don't refer to the United States as a constitutional republic, you're not a conservative. If you don't use the phrase limited government, he never said that. That's not. Look what he's doing now. I mean, he's cutting the government in a big. So there'll be. I mean, it's just crazy. He won me over this way. I mean, I was nervous about him through the campaign because you don't know. This is his first venture into politics. I don't know. I'm not nervous about him anymore, although I think he'll disappoint me on some things. But he won me over in the first debate. Here's a guy, he's never been a political candidate before. He's on a platform with 12 of the top Republicans in the country. It's in front of, I don't remember, it's 30 million people or whatever it is. And he gets the first question because he has the highest percentage in the polls. And it's not a question, it's an attack from Megyn Kelly. You called women fat pigs, slobs, and dogs. And he says, oh, that was just Rosie O'Donnell. I said, this guy is a guy they can't intimidate. Because political correctness is a party line. Mm-hmm. As I said, it comes from Mao. It's like a communist party line. It shuts you up. There is no other Republican under the sun who on national TV, this time in front of 50 million people, would have looked Hillary Clinton in the eye and said, you're a liar and a crook, even though she's both. If it were a male, they would say it. Why? Because there's this gigantic double standard. It's politically incorrect to say anything critical about a woman. This is ridiculous. If that's the case, they shouldn't be in politics. Now, the left will just take out that phrase. They shouldn't be in politics. But you can't be protected and at the same time pretend to be strong.
It's interesting how pernicious some of this stuff is, because I'll even see sometimes if a man attacks me on Twitter, not that Twitter fights are that important, but I'll immediately defend myself and come back. And I've had a few instances where women have, and I've just ignored it because I don't want to attack a woman. And I know that's my own, it's just my own reflection of what I'm,
We've all been schooled in that. And there's penalties. You have to think quickly about what the consequences are.
So
how do you phrase it?
So that desire to punch back or to not be held hostage by political correctness or all that stuff, would you argue that is far more important than any of his political beliefs?
Totally.
That's the end.
Once I saw, here's a guy who the Democrats can't intimidate. Look, I use this phrase in my speeches. Whenever I see a Republican square off against a Democrat, it looks to me like Godzilla versus Bambi. Because the Democrat is going to call the Republican a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe. And the Republican will call the Democrat a liberal. Who's going to win that argument? So this is a bulldozer, and I love the way they call Trump a blitzkrieg. The Democrat blitzkrieg. We have a tradition in this country, it's sacred to a democracy, of a honeymoon for an incoming president. It says there's a peaceful transition of power. It says we're all part of one community. It says we're going to see what you do, and then we're free to criticize you. And the remedy is the next election. Trump didn't get 7 seconds. He didn't get confirmation hearings. He got a witch hunt. And this is another example of how political correctness works. Jeff Sessions, I've known him for 20 years, and I've known a lot of senators, one of a handful of the most decent human beings in the Senate, a champion of civil rights. This was an attorney general in a deep South state who prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan, who desegregated the schools, and there's Elizabeth Warren calling him a racist, and then violating Senate rules to repeat calling him a racist, and when she's told to shut up, they say, oh, they're silencing another woman.
Yeah.
That's how effective political correctness is. It just...
To be clear, for people that didn't follow that whole thing, she was reading other people's words, which isn't technically allowed in the Senate. So that she was doing something that she wasn't allowed to do by their own rules.
Exactly.
Then everyone turned it into this thing.
And it happened to be a letter from Coretta Scott King that she was repudiated. What happened was, in Alabama, there were 3 blacks whose were defrauded of their voting rights because they were in opposition to 3 other blacks who were NAACP corrupt officials. That's the whole case. And Sessions didn't know how to defend himself the first time he was up in the 80s. I mean, this is the thing. Republicans are not used to fighting back. They're used to getting out of the way. Why wouldn't you if people are calling you racist, sexist, homophobe?
So it's obvious to me that that stuff is not working as much anymore. So then my last question to you...
Terrific. That is amazing.
Right. So the words aren't, but what I now think is we're going to see more violence because they've been pinned into a corner where everyone that they're against is a Nazi and a racist and all those things.
We will see violence.
So I suspect we're going to see more violence. But my last question to you is, with this evolution, with now the first Republican, as you're saying, with Trump that's not going to take it, what's the good path now? Like, what if you could see something good coming out of these next couple of years? What is that path?
You know, I am. Antonio Gramsci once said that the revolutionary must have pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And I think he stole that from somebody. I can't remember who, but I think he did. It's in Wikipedia.
Well, if it's in Wikipedia, but it's definitely stolen from somebody.
You know, my head will tell me there's nothing as good as going to come, and you know, and you can see. I mean, there's so many problems. You know, as I pointed out in my book, Big Agenda, the left, the Democratic Party, is a totalitarian party now. It lied to get Obamacare in, lied about you can keep your doctor, lied about you can keep your plan, and its mission was control. It's an incredible assault on individual freedom. The government tells you you have to have insurance. The government tells you you have to have, you have, what are they, 4 packages. This is the kind of insurance you have to have. And the government gets all your health information. That is a totalitarian threat right there. But Republicans, they're lame. Why aren't they saying that? So replacing Obamacare is obviously, you know, as we're speaking, Republicans are all in disarray. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Trump is fairly isolated. You have all these conservative idiots like Kristol and McMullen gunning for him. Republicans march to their tune of their own, is that it? Drummers all the time. They're individualists. I was amazed when the Tea Party came in and held a demonstration in Washington. Before that, you couldn't get 3 Republicans to march together because they look at each other and say, what are we, collectivists?
So does that then, I already said it was the last question, but we'll keep going for a little bit. So does that though, so when the Tea Party organized and the Tea Party was gaining momentum, everyone was saying there were these redneck backwards gun nuts and
in
racists.
Fact, they were very decent people who cleaned up after themselves.
That's what I was going to say.
Whereas the left is just destructive.
Nobody was hurt. There was no violence. Cops weren't hurt.
Fascists.
Yeah.
When people start referring to the left as fascists and not liberals, then I'll say, okay, we're winning now. Right now, it isn't happening. They go on, like I say, I mean, it's corrupted our culture, it's corrupted our schools. It's just very, very bad. But I think, you know, my faith is in Steve Bannon and Steve Miller. These are 2 fighters, and Trump. And Trump understands instinctively that when you get attacked, you attack back and throw them off. Well, I have this phrase that I picked up from Chris Lehane, who's a Democratic. It was in the New York Times, an article about him. A Democratic strategist, but he stole it from Mike Tyson, which is everybody has a game plan until you punch them in the mouth. And the Democrats have a massive punch in the mouth for Republicans, calling them racist. And Republicans have to come back and call Democrats. The Democratic Party is the party of racism. It's the party of racial categories. It's the party of identity politics. It's the party of the inner cities. It is a racist party. It is also, and I loved this, what Trump said, it was in the second debate. He turned to the cameras and said, you have to understand, Hillary has tremendous hatred in her heart. And what he was referring to was the basket of deplorables, which she named. She identified all of her opponents, or whatever, half, it's the same thing, are racist, sexist, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes, you name it. And he's raised them up. There isn't a conservative or a deviating liberal who hasn't been in an argument with a so-called liberal who hasn't been called a racist, a sexist, a homophobe.
So in a way, that was a gift.
The Democratic Party is a party of hate. That's what they run on. Everything they're doing now is hate. Invent conspiracy theories with the Russians. I mean, this from a party whose candidate turned over 20% of America's uranium reserves to the Russians. I mean, how do you deal with that? The only way, in politics, you have a 9-second soundbite. Just go for the jugular.
Well, I hope.
But I don't want you, I like your style. I want to see if we can convert people that way.
Yeah. Well, I think
just
interestingly, I think interestingly, people are being converted on both sides, because I think what's happening is, I know for sure that I've helped a lot of progressives realize what true liberalism is, and at the same time, I think I've had, and I know that I've gotten a lot of more conservative people to realize that not all liberals are bad, and I think that's where most of us actually are.
I know. That's good. I don't want to take anything away from you, but I found when I came into the right, conservatives are generally very decent people. And when I criticized the religious right leadership, I had different reactions from things like the Family Research Council. I had people in my face, their blood vessels popping, screaming at me. And I had people who were very supportive, very Christian in that way. And I also had this experience in the 2008, I was at the Moral Majority. Ralph Reed had invited me to come down to Atlanta. And the woman who was my connection there, and a Moral Majority member, I asked her, I said, well, if John McCain gets a nomination, will you vote for him? And she said, yeah. So, you know, people, what the religious right needs to understand is that there's religion and then there's politics. And religion is about saving your immortal soul. And if you mess with the devil, you endanger it. And in politics, you make pacts with the devil all the time. It's about getting into office and trying to practically change some things.
Yeah.
And one thing that I wanted to talk to you about that
I just remembered it's a home studio, so we can keep going.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Is this? Why is the left and now so-called liberalism? Why are progressives totalitarians? And the answer is that it's a crypto-religious ideology. It's modeled on Christianity. The world is a fallen place, although they never use that. The world is an oppressive place. It's injustice rules. But there will be a redemption. And we are the redeemers. That's the danger. We have to and then you see it all the time, we have to remake humanity so it fits our model of the redemption. That's why they're so dangerous.
So if only Bernie was in.
We have to outlaw, we have to stamp out racist, sexist, homophobes, people who we disagree with.
Yeah.
Milo, we can't let him speak. That is the only difference between that and an actual totalitarian state is if they had the power, they would execute Milo. He'd be in a gulag or he'd be dead.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a line a couple of years ago that Oprah, who, and I basically like Oprah and respect Oprah, and I'd be happy to have her on the show, of course, when she was talking about this older generation and some of their backwards ways of thinking, and she said, well, they just have to die. And I remember thinking, like, even if what you're saying, yes, there might be, studies show that younger people are generally more liberal on the social issues.
They're not more liberal, they're less
right,
liberal.
they're
the
less
older blacks are liberal, that's why Oprah doesn't like them.
Oh, all right, so that sort of fits everything else that you're saying. But my point being that when she said it, it sounds so nuts to me, because one day, if you take that logic to its end, guess what? One day the young people are going to want all of you dead when you're old, because it just will. It'll just keep going.
Can't try to make sense out of it, but it's actually the reverse. See, older blacks are not as racist as younger blacks. Racism is pervasive now. I mean, this is a very politically incorrect to say, but I think it's pretty obvious. Racism is pervasive in the black community, and especially among younger people who have been to schools and told that all their problems come from white racists. Very bad, The 50s were much better times in this country.
So I think I only got a half answer then before you said my head doesn't have a lot of hope, something to that effect about
That's
the future.
Right.
But what about your
my
heart?
head? Well, I'm an optimist by genes. I don't know how I am. I just am. I phrased it in a book I wrote. When my head is in conflict with my heart, I follow my heart. So I'm going to fight till I drop, as though there's going to be a positive outcome. But there's what was his name? Scipio Africanus was a Roman general who burned Carthage. And when he saw Carthage going up in smoke, he wept. Because the classical view was that it's all cyclical. Empires rise and fall, societies rise and fall. And this idea of progress is one of the really bad ideas that the Jews gave to us. The idea that there's a promised land. Huh. Although maybe Moses didn't mean it in the way that leftists mean it. But that idea of a progress is the problem. Can't redeem the world. Can't be fixed. Why can't the world be fixed? Because the root source of all social problems is us, individuals. So you can maybe, it's very hard to take one individual who's gone off the deep end and bring them back.
Yeah.
But, modest, and this is the oldest thing. I was Voltaire, tend your own garden. You can make the space around you maybe a little bit more humane. You can help an individual, but you can't change the world.
Well, on that note, I sense we could do a lot more, so we'll have to do this again.
Okay.
We'll see. Maybe we'll do this. How about we do this 1 year from now, and we'll see if I've incorporated some of your tactics.
You're an optimist.
I'm an optimist too.
I'll be around next year.
I can't help it.
I'm old enough to know that will be, a blessing.
You're 78 years old. How do you look so good?
Your makeup.
That's all the makeup? No, I saw you when you walked in. Come on. What's the trick?
I don't know. I have a great marriage, wonderful wife. I've tried to balance the political with, real life stuff. My animals, I have all these dogs I love. Yeah, I don't know. And it's also in the genes.
All right. 1 year from now, we will do it again. And for more on David, you can check out his new book, Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America, and visit horowitzfreedomcenter.org.